You're back with us live in our studio, and we're joined today by Zelda la Grange, Nelson Mandela's former personal assistant for 19 years and the author of Good Morning, Mr. Mandela, the extraordinary book and the story of how her life and everything she believed was transformed by the greatest man of our time, our late Tata Madiba. And it's great to have you here, Zelda. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Great to be here.
So good to have you here after, you've been so busy all around the world touring and signing books and telling your story. And I don't know how many people actually know it, how many people have picked up the book, but bring us into the picture of how it all happened, because as a young Afrikaner woman growing up, you were a believer in the apartheid system to a certain extent, and then you walked into Tata Madiba's life, and from being a typist, you became his personal assistant. How did that happen?
As a Sunday newspaper put it, I was spectacularly ill-equipped for this job, actually. Grew up in a very conservative household, a very conservative family. Father was a businessman, mother a teacher, no political connection whatsoever. And then I applied for a senior ministerial typist job in J. Naidu's office, actually, in 1994. Because of a logistical arrangement, I needed a job closer to my parents' home. And then I ended up in Madiba's office, actually working for Miriam Kladana, his personal secretary at the time.
Yeah. And so take me through that first meeting, because I understand that something rather extraordinary happened that you didn't expect when you met Tata Madiba for the first time.
Yes, I suddenly found this man in front of me, the man I was brought up to fear and to be afraid of. And it was actually in his office, or in Mary's office, and I stood in front of him and he extended his hand, and I didn't know whether I was supposed to greet this man or not. And he spoke to me and I couldn't understand a word he said, and I had to say, "Excuse me, Mr. President," and he repeated himself, and only then did I realize he was actually speaking to me in Afrikaans.
Wow.
So you feel like an idiot not understanding your own language, but it was because of shock. It's the last thing you expected of him was that he spoke my language, the oppressor's language.
Yes.
And that destroyed my defenses immediately, and I broke down and I was crying, and he put his other hand on my shoulder and he said, "Relax now, you're overreacting."
Oh, my
so
goodness.
if the president tells you you're overreacting, you compose yourself. Yeah.
Do you remember what he said to you, though?
He asked about my family. You know, there was the sincerity in his voice and in his eyes. He was really interested in me as a being, as a human being.
Wow.
Asked about my upbringing and where I come from and so on. So we had a full-on long conversation.
That's incredible. And I also, from the book itself, there's a moment where you say he held your hand. He held your hand, and this is something that you weren't expecting. You weren't sure whether you were supposed to hold this black man's hand, but he insisted on holding your hand. What was that whole experience about, and how did that kind of change your idea of the world, as it were, at the time?
Well, you know, Katlego, I think in those years, the only black people that was acceptable to me as a white person was the person that brought me up, the black lady that brought me up. Other black people were not in my circle of trust. So this man extends his hand to you and you don't know what to do. Am I supposed to hold this man's hand because he represented fear in my eyes?
Yeah.
He was the enemy to me, yet he extends the hand, and he held onto my hand for a very, very long time. And he wouldn't let go. And then, you know, as you hold someone's hand, you start feeling the texture of the hand, and you start feeling, the firmness of the handshake and the sincerity, even in that non-verbal communication. So that also played a huge role in destroying my defenses and making me at ease around him, really.
Yeah. And I mean, I could think that, it was obviously a process. You spent 19 years with Tata Madiba as his personal assistant, and that change obviously didn't happen immediately. So yes, your defenses were broken, but when was that moment when you realized that, but wait, my whole view of the world is actually very skewed? Well,
the first day I met him in his office, that day I just described to you, I started questioning my own beliefs. I thought, why was I brought up to fear this man? He appeared quite kind. He doesn't look dangerous. He was very sincere to me, and he looked loving and kind. So what was these things that I was brought up to believe? And then I started questioning. But after that, I would probably say over a period of about a year, 2 years, I had to learn the history of my own country and come to terms with the liberation struggle and what really happened in this country, to get that wake-up call that, we were so wrong.
And very, very quickly, I mean, what were some of your favorites, or one, if you could share one of your favorite moments spent with Tata Madiba?
Obviously the last moment, because that is the most precious moment to anyone. And that was when I saw him in the hospital last year on the 11th of July. And his face, he could still react, and his face just lit up, and he gave me that infectious smile. That's the fondest memory.
Wow, beautiful. Zelda la Grange here in our studio talking to us about her book, Good Morning, Mr. Mandela. We'll be talking to her a bit later on. Leigh-Anne, I mean, doesn't this just warm your your heart?